How did you learn about your mother and her family coming to the United States from Portugal? What were you told?
Being Portuguese was always a big part of my heritage, and so I've always known that my mother emigrated from Portugal. That's just always been part of our history. What happened is my grandparents came over when my mother was very young, and then after they retired, they moved back to Portugal. So that's really how I knew, is because everybody, when we had Grandparents' Day, in grade school. I didn't have a grandparent because mine lived in Portugal. So it wasn't, I always knew the story that they came over when my mom was 6.5, almost 7. It wasn't until recently as an adult that she began telling me more about it, that she gave me more details about why they left Portugal and what the situation was. So the basic situation for my grandfather was one of 10 children. And that was just untenable for his parents. They just could not feed that many mouths. So I can't remember if it was 16 or 18, they kicked him out of the house. And there was, because of the oppressive regime, there were no opportunities. We're not from a major town. The town that we're from is this tiny little town named Portuguese in the north of Portugal. So like nowhere near any urban center at all. And so there weren't any opportunities to be had. In fact, my grandfather used to try and find work as, just a laborer or whatever needed to be done. And he would come back to the house at night, and his mother would secretly pass him food through a hole in the wall, because her husband was like, he's out of the house. You can't take care of him anymore. So that's a really desperate kind of situation. And I mean, I never knew any of that growing up. I never knew that until I was an adult myself, and my mother began to tell me the stories just more frankly, and more, with a lot more detail. My grandfather somehow scraped up enough money to come over to America, and he came over. He was unmarried. He was a young man, and it was not unusual for people to go back and forth. So he came back to Portugal to visit his family, ended up meeting and marrying my grandmother, and my mom says that for the next several years, every time he came back, they had another kid. So every trip he made back, they created another child, at least for the first 3. And then there's a big gap between my mom and her youngest sister, who's the last of the 4. And Aunt Helen was born here in America. So in that gap, he made enough money working in America to be able to bring them. So my mother never met her father until they came to America, because he was here working. In the gap between her being conceived and him bringing them over, that 6, almost 7 years, she'd never met him. He was here in America earning enough money to bring them over. That's not I think, unusual for immigrant families of that era, or even immigrant families today. My mom doesn't remember really people talking about Salazar. She recognized the name. People talked about Salazar, but she was a little kid. She didn't make the connections of it's this tyrannical regime, this fascist regime that is causing us to have such a lack of opportunity, and that's why we came to America. What she knew is everyone told her that America was the land of the dolls, that she would be able to have a doll when she came to America, which I think is, again, she couldn't afford a doll in Portugal. I mean, that's how bad things were. That's how poor people were.
After you learned about what happened, what ideas of yours changed, if any?
It didn't occur to me until I was teaching here and heard Dr. Ryan lecturing about it, that, oh yeah, no, that's why they moved. That it was a fascist regime and they had to get out of there. Not because they were particularly hunted or anything, but because the regime led to intense poverty and oppression, and that's really what they were escaping. That's really what my family was escaping. It wasn't simply, you know, to come to America and have a new experience, a new life. It was because there were no opportunities in Portugal for them. Mom says that a lot of our family, like I said, my grandfather was one of 10. A lot of his sisters and brothers moved not out of Portugal, but they moved like to Lisbon, like to the cities, Lisbon and Porto and, you know, whatever, trying to find opportunities that way, and did. But you know, for Portugal was a Catholic country. People had big families because there's no belief in contraception, and so it just wasn't. I didn't put all the pieces together until I was an adult myself to think, oh, all these different factors play into my family story. This is the house my mother grew up in. This is the one I was looking for. So it's this little, here's another picture. So it's this little, like, one room and a kitchen for the whole family. Yeah. And obviously no one lives in it now. It was just left to kind of decay.
Is there any specific story your mother told you about her experience that stands out?
So my mom was a little kid. She's 6.5 years old. She had a pet cricket. When she first told me that, I'm like, seriously, that's how poor you were? You had a pet cricket? You had a bug? So she had this pet cricket in a cage, and she brought it with. Now she came over on a boat, so it was 8 days on the boat. She says she came over with like a lot of people she knew, like a lot of people from the neighborhood all came over together, and it was wonderful. Like it was a wonderful experience. Everyone took care of the little girl with the cricket. The people in the kitchens would give her lettuce to feed the cricket, her little pet cricket. She comes over, so. They came to Philadelphia. A lot of people went to through Ellis Island or you know, other places, but my mom's boat came to Philadelphia, and they were met by her father and by the Portuguese consulate and his wife. So my grandfather somehow knew the Portuguese consulate. The consulate does exist to help, you know, help immigrants sort of make their way into the country and get settled in the country. So the Portuguese consulate's wife was a lady. And she saw my mom standing there. I mean, imagine coming into port in Philadelphia. It's this huge city. You're from this tiny little town where nothing happens. You're coming into this huge city, you're seeing skyscrapers for the first time in your life. It's bustling. Everybody's speaking a language you don't understand. There's all sorts of things going on. So she's standing there holding the handle of the cricket cage in her mouth, like just in fear. And the Portuguese consulate's wife sees her and goes, "Don't do that, that's dirty." Slaps the cricket cage right out of my mom's mouth, and there goes the cricket. I know! Isn't that awful?
Did you or anyone in your family have a strong reaction when hearing about these events in Portugal?
That's the one you were going to ask, and actually, no. My family, like, I guess what my mother remembers is that, you know, like, she remembers they discussed things in sort of an abstract way, but, like a lot of people, my family just kind of lived their lives. And, you know, once they were over here, they were over here. And she doesn't remember anyone having particularly strong feelings. However, it's still being taught in schools, and it's still, I think, very present in the education and in the minds of my own generation. You know, living in Portugal, and especially in the rural areas. I mean, I don't know what's going on. I don't know how people thought of it necessarily in Lisbon or in Porto, But certainly in these rural towns where, you had to kick people out of the house because you couldn't feed them anymore, it definitely had an effect, and I think it's an effect that's still being felt.